Well, after last week's horrifying reveal, Elliot struggles to move on in another fantastic episode.
Don't change the channel. Don't touch that dial. We got it all on UHF. Take off your sneakers.
Hey guys, it's Counting My Review for Mr. Robot, Season 4, Episode 8, Timeout, and what another fantastic episode this really was. And I mean, I was obviously hyped for this episode, more so than I've been for, like, any Mr. Robot episode, mainly because of the fact, I mean, after last week, this entire show has pretty much changed in that way. You know, it was such a game-changing reveal that really flipped the entire show on its head and really made us all question, you know, where is it really going from here? What could really happen now? And the answer is a lot of things could end up happening. And look, asking any episode to follow up such a dynamic and such a standout episode in that way, in terms of the television medium overall, it's obviously, you know, definitely going to be hard. It's definitely not going to deliver in that way. But this episode came pretty damn close, I gotta say. This was another really fantastic episode. It was riveting, it was emotional, and it was just overall everything that makes this show great. They continue to just be upping the momentum every single week, and we're just getting into right now. So look, while most of this episode, you know, a lot of the action focused on Dom and Darlene, I want to start off by talking about Elliot, because that's the stuff I was most excited to see in this episode. I was very interested in seeing how exactly they were going to deal with this moving forward, and you know, as we're seeing, I think they're handling it pretty perfectly, honestly. The way that Elliot is going about this feels very real. You can see that he's completely shooken up with what has ended up happening. He doesn't really know how to move on, and there's a lot of things that show this in this episode. I mean, just the conversation he has with Krista, where he tells her that, like, he doesn't think that she should see him again, you know, but she wants to help him, and we've seen how this has brought them closer together. She's realized there's still work that needs to be done. There's still a lot that he needs to know, that, you know, there's still a lot that she needs to help him with, and it's only brought them closer in that way. But you can see that Elliot is, at this point, someone who is not hiding his emotions anymore. And it's really great to see an Elliot that isn't afraid of that, but it also is probably the single most depressing Elliot's ever been, just because of the fact that he is so down on himself this entire episode. I mean, something as simple as just him reflecting on a past event, the opening scene where we see, you know, him and young Angela playing hide and seek, and we see even back then he had Mr. Robot. Even back then he was trying to, you know, he was getting sidetracked by something else. So this has been happening throughout his entire life, and considering that, you know, he himself is a hacker, and that's something that he's always been known to do, and that a lot of it was because he wanted to bring down the corporation that he thought killed his father, obviously he is going to feel like he doesn't really know how to move on. And I mean, we see this not just through that last scene with Mr. Robot, which, trust me, I am going to get into that, but through the way he is seeing his past self. He's looking at his past self, and he's apologizing to his past self. He hates the fact that he put himself through this. He wishes that he didn't hide this part of himself, and it's very devastating to watch. And the scenes that we get with Elliot, and what I'm assuming is, you know, in his head, the younger version of him, I thought was very effective. Seeing them go into the subway and not really knowing where they're going, but especially when he gets to that museum, that's when Rami Malek really gets to show off. And I mean, yeah, he's obviously an incredible actor. We saw this in last week's episode for sure. But again, another big standout moment, I think, is when he finds that key. And we realize that this is the key that he tried to hide. He tried to do everything in his power to take this key, because this was the key to his bedroom. This was the key that kept letting his father in, and he tried to hide it from him as best as he can to make sure that that abuse never happened, to make sure that he could go at least one night without having to put up with it. And just realizing how frequent this was and realizing how much this damaged Elliot and how set he was on trying to prevent all of that from happening, it's just really devastating to watch. And obviously, it's very uncomfortable, but I love the fact that, he's just apologizing that he didn't protect himself, and he literally is screaming. Like, he is mad that he didn't do something to stop this. He wishes that he didn't endure this series of events, but obviously he can't take it back, and he's kind of suffering with I would say prolonged PTSD in that way. It's like an elongated PTSD, because I would imagine he's had this for a long time. He's clearly had the effects of that, but he's never really come to terms with it, and now he really is, having to face it again. And you can just imagine what Elliot's been through. Imagine if you locked up the most traumatic moment of your life. You wanted to act like it didn't happen, so much so that you just went about your life and created this whole other narrative, and then suddenly the rug is pulled out from you, but not in a very gentle way. It's in a very forceful, aggressive manner, and you're forced to relive those painful memories. I can imagine it'd fuck you up pretty bad, and that's exactly what's happening to Elliot right now. He just doesn't really know how he's going to move on from all of this, and we also harken back to a very interesting scene that I kind of forgot about. The dream in Season 1, Episode 4. If you remember, he has this dream where he has this key that keeps coming back. He's with Angela, everything's happy, but there's this key. It keeps appearing to protect him from the monster. And we know now that that monster was his father. His father was really the driving force of why Elliot has turned into who he is today. And he talks about how he wasn't trying to run away. He was, in fact, fighting back. He was doing what he could to protect him, and probably Darlene as well. He knew what, Edward could do to Darlene, and I think he did everything in his power to protect her in that way, and I think they handled all of that stuff so well. And like I said, just seeing Elliot's, seeing his past self and reflecting on what he did back then, and almost victim blaming himself in that way, which I'm not saying the episode is victim blaming. Elliot himself feels like this is his fault. He feels like he could have stopped this. It just feels very brutally honest in that way. It feels very brutally realistic, and I think this show is handling this subject better than most, and I'm just really happy that they did touch upon something like this, because again, it can be very risky for any show to handle it, but I think the show is doing a pretty excellent job with it so far. But of course, the other big moment in Elliot's plotline is the inclusion of Mr. Robot, which, after last week's episode, it was very up in the air as if we'll ever see him again. I mean, I thought at least we'd see him, in the finale. I did not expect it to be this soon, but you know what? It makes a lot more sense as to why Elliot really still needs Mr. Robot in his life, because we see Mr. Robot himself is also very sorrowful. Even though Mr. Robot kept this from him, that does not villainize Mr. Robot, and I think they're handling that very well, because you would think after last week's events, he would be going in a villainous direction, but remember, Mr. Robot is just the part of Elliot that he's hiding. Mr. Robot is just what Elliot wanted to conceal in that way. What he didn't want to accept. And now you have a Mr. Robot that is regretting all of this stuff. He's regretting the fact that, he kept this from himself. And you can see that Mr. Robot wishes that he could have undone it. He wishes that he could have been the father. He wishes that Edward was the father that Elliot created Mr. Robot into. And look, maybe this wasn't very subtle. Maybe it was a bit on the nose, but I'm glad that they confirmed, why Mr. Robot was created, because this was something we were all kind of speculating, and that Mr. Robot was created because he was the father that Elliot never had. He wasn't the father that he had, he was the father that he wanted, and someone who's far more nurturing, someone who actually was there for him, someone who was there to protect him, which was something that Edward could never do. Edward was just so emotionally and physically abusive in that way, and that's something that Elliot just had to kind of accept, and he didn't want to accept it, so he created Mr. Robot. And you also see that Mr. Robot, again, he also feels like he wishes that he could go back in time and stop all this from happening, which, no, I do not think that is them foreshadowing that that's where the show is headed. I don't think that's where this is going at all. I know there's a huge speculation that, there's going to be a time travel thing and that they're going to undo everything. I don't think that's where the show's going. That'd be absolutely ridiculous if it do. This whole thing would be absolutely pointless if that was the case, and I do not think they're going in that direction. What I think this is trying to show is that Mr. Robot needs to be there for Elliot, and that he's the one that is going to help get Elliot through all of this. Because as we see at the end of the episode, Elliot doesn't even really know if he wants to do this anymore. He doesn't know if he actually wants to pull off this hack. And it makes sense, because now it's like, what's the point of me doing this? Besides the fact that Darlene wants to, what is the point of him really putting any stock into this? What is this really getting him? What purpose does it serve? He knows that his father was not a good person. He knows that his father was abusive, and he knows that he's been doing all of this for essentially nothing. So it makes sense why at the end of this episode he's just breaking down, and he's kind of having this epiphany where it's like, what's the point? Where do I really go from here? And I think that's going to be Elliot's character arc in the next few episodes. It's like, wait for the rest of the show. I think the rest of the show is going to be, my purpose is not to avenge my father's death. Now what? And I think that's something that a lot of people are faced with when they have a, game-changing revelation like this, is that, what do I do now? What was it all for at the end of the day? And that's something that Elliot is kind of reconciling on in this episode, and I think they did a really great job with that. And oh my god, when he just broke down, it broke me, honestly. It was a very, very bleak way to end the episode, but again, it just feels so real in that sense. You really do feel like you're going at this with Elliot. We don't know where Elliot is heading. We don't know what else Elliot could possibly do at this point, but whatever it is, I can't imagine it's going to be something good. I can't imagine that Elliot is actually going to be able to pull this off on his own, which, I mean, we'll talk about the Darlene stuff in a bit, but I like the fact that we reestablish what Mr. Robot's point is in the show. He's going to be the thing that helps get Elliot through this. I think he's going to be the thing that really drives him moving forward, and I think that even if Elliot doesn't make it out of this, which I do think is still likely, I do not see Elliot surviving past the end of the show. I think Mr. Robot is going to be the thing to at least give him some kind of a new purpose, and at least give him that drive back that he's completely lost at this point. And I'm very interested in seeing where that's going to go moving forward. It's going to be devastating for sure, but my god, are they handling it well. So with all that said, let's get into the Dom Darlene stuff, because holy shit, this whole thing was so tense, and it was basically like a hostage film. It was so crazy in that way, and look, I was obviously expecting it to be very white-knuckled during this whole thing, but I was not expecting it to be on the level that it was. I mean, just the levels of suspense, the levels of tension, it was just constant. From the first scene where we see Dom's family going about Christmas, and you have the scene where, her, brother's acting out, and, you see him having to be, put on a timeout and things like that, and then you see those soldiers come in. Oh, it was just so well done in that way. But Ashlie Atkinson, holy shit, she was so terrifying throughout this entire episode. And what I love about Janice, I've said it before, they're finding a way to make her scary in a way that Irving wasn't. Irving was scary because he was the guy that didn't react much. He had a very, he was very personable in that way. He didn't seem like someone that would hurt you. And then, so when he was more unhinged, and when he finally let out that anger, it was much more terrifying in that way. It felt like this is what he had been hiding the entire time. Janice, on the other hand, oozes with a sense of creepiness, oozes with this sense of menace throughout the entire show. She always feels like every single scene she could kill you. It feels like anything you tell her, I mean, she could just kill you in an instant. And this episode in particular just really showed how much she really does mean business here. And the whole scene with her, and knowing what she's capable of, knowing that she could just kill Dom's entire family, is just, again, it's horrifying to think about, and you're just thinking of the worst throughout this entire episode, but I also like how this kind of brings Dom and Darlene back together in that way. It kind of gets them back on, which, I mean, they kind of did in the last episode, but especially this episode, it really does start to bring them back together because Janice forces Dom to admit that she still has feelings for Darlene, that she actually, has been, masturbating to that, interrogation thing with Darlene and things like that. And this is something that Darlene does not really seem to take all that kindly to. She basically says that it was just sex and that's all it was. But I think this episode indicates there's definitely something more there. I think definitely Darlene does feel bad for what she did to Dom, but I think she just needed to say that in an effort to get Janice to drop it. She didn't want to have to go through all of this, and very early on in the episode, Janice ends up shooting Dom. It's a very lethal shot, too. It's like, I think it was like right in the arteries or something like that. And you think that Dom's just going to bite the dust right then and there. I really thought this was going to be the end of Dom, but I gotta say, this really was Grace Scummer's hour. I mean, I've never seen her this good ever, really. I mean, she's always been great in this show, but never to the level of what she was here. This is a Dom that has been put through the ringer. This is a Dom that knows exactly what the Dark Army is capable of, and she's just had enough of it. She feels defeated. She feels weakened. But you always know that Dom is someone who is trying to stay on top. Dom is someone who tries to be, and I've always said, I think Dom out of everyone in this show right now is probably the best person on this show in terms of, like, morals and things like that. Dom is the good person. She's a good person who always tries to do the right thing, and Dom's at a crossroads right now. She's been manipulated by the Dark Army this entire time. She's been under their thumb. She's had to do these things that she really didn't want to have to do, and you don't really know how this is going to go at this point. And, Janice gets to a point where she is hounding Darlene for this information, but we know that Darlene doesn't really have it. She doesn't know where Elliot is right now. She doesn't know what's going on with him. She knows where he was last, but she doesn't actually know where he is at this point. And the second that happened, I was like, oh my god, I don't know, maybe Darlene's about to die. Like, I really did think the worst throughout this entire episode, which is why the scene of Janice getting that call from the other person in the Dark Army, basically saying that he's killed everyone else in the Dark Army, all the Dark Army agents, and he's gotten Dom's family to a secure location. They're going to be fine for a little bit. And this distracts Janice and basically tells them that, like, look, if you're not doing what I want you to do, I can take you out. You're no use to us anymore. You think that maybe she's going to kill him. You think that maybe she's just going to put the hit on Dom's entire family. But this is the moment where Dom does decide that she's just had enough of this. She finally takes action. She grabs the gun, shoots anyone affiliated with the Dark Army right then and there, including Janice. Janice is dead, and Dom is finally free in that way. And it's such a liberating moment, and it's such a relief. But you also know that Dom's not okay, because there's still thousands of Dark Army agents out there. There's still a Deus meeting that's being held. Like, the Dark Army is not gone at this point. They're not dead in that way. But it also does reinforce why this Deus meeting is still important. Yes, it might not be because Elliot needs to bring his father to justice. No, now it's about trying to, bringing to justice the people that have died because of the Dark Army. The Trentons, the Mobleys, the Santiagos, the Angelas, the Terrells, and potentially Dom's family. So this is why Darlene needs to go after them. And the moment where she wants to tend to Dom, and I think that's the moment that shows that Darlene still does care about Dom. This was definitely more to her than just a one-night stand. I think she definitely does. I don't know if she has feelings for her, like, romantically or anything, but she definitely does care about her. Like, she wanted Dom to come out of this, and I hope Dom's able to recover. I really do, but now, like I said, I like that we now have a larger purpose here, but I also think Darlene's, similar to Mr. Robot, is going to be the one that motivates Elliot. I think Elliot, knowing that this is something his sister really wants to do, and something that she needs to get done, I think that is going to get him to get his mojo back in that way. I think that's going to get him back on the right path. I don't think, again, he's going to fully recover from this, but I think it's at least going to put him in proper shape to where he's able to pull this off. I think that's going to happen moving forward. I'm excited to see those two reunite, but this was all kinds of suspenseful. This was so tension-filled. I really had no idea how this was going to go. I certainly did not expect for the Dom plot to end this early on, but I'm very excited to see where it just go moving forward. And I have to say, I think they really did do an excellent job with that. I don't really think they did a bad job with, I don't really think this felt rushed. I don't really think this felt like, oh, we didn't get what we need out of the Janice character. I really felt like we got what we needed out of her. We saw that she was someone that was a very threatening presence. She was someone that was fully capable of what she was able to do. She made sure that what she needed done got done until someone finally was able to cross her, until there was someone who was able to be used as a distraction. And that person was Dom. Dom was someone who was finally able to bring her down, and after seeing all of the torture and you know, all of the fear that has been inflicted in Dom throughout the entire season, I can't really think of a better way for this to go than Dom finally getting her justice to the Dark Army, and finally getting to bring them down, and finally taking ownership of herself, something she has not been able to do throughout the entire season, and I cannot wait to see where that's going to go moving forward. I absolutely, again, loved everything about this. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the technical stuff in this episode. I mean, as always, the direction here was just so top-notch, but again, something that this final season is just doing so well is just how vital everything really does feel, but also how important everything does feel. Every single moment of this episode, you really do feel like you're in it. You really do feel like everything is on the line, and again, because of the final season, it feels like something, the worst thing could happen every single second. I legitimately thought there'd be a moment where maybe Dom dies or maybe Darlene died, and I'm glad that it did not go in that direction, because I don't feel like their stories are done yet. As, you know, as opposed to Terrell or Angela, who I was okay with dying because I felt like both of their stories had come to a solid conclusion, I don't really feel that way for the characters of Dom or Darlene, so I'm glad that they kept them alive. I'm excited to see where they do go with them moving forward, and the writing in this episode, I think, was just so impeccable in that way. The way it's handling, like I said, Elliot's PTSD, but also him having to grapple with these past demons, and now finally having to accept that they happen, and them coming back to light, and how it's kind of stifling him from doing what he has done moving forward, and him even contemplating if he wants to do this anymore, I think was just such a good idea, and I think makes so much sense for someone in Elliot's position, and I do think it is going to be the thing that gets him to finally maybe end up in a better place. I do think he is going to start to end up in a better place, but for all we know, I mean, this Deus hack that goes, I mean, again, the worst possible things could end up happening. We don't really know what's going to happen next week, but I'm just glad this Deus hack is finally going to be happening next week, because I don't really know where else the show's going to go. I've said that, like, for all these, I've said that, like, every single week now, but again, I really don't know how this hack is going to go moving forward, if they're going to be able to successfully hack it, and what this Deus group really does entail, knowing that Terrell is now dead. I don't really know how that's all going to play out, but I guess we'll just have to see. So that was definitely interesting for sure, but the cinematography is what I really want to talk about here, particularly with the stuff with Dom and Darlene. The 360 angles were just so well done. It kept you on the edge of your seat, and the way the camera kept spinning in that way, I just thought was very indicative of just, again, how dire things were, and just the atmosphere of it all. It made the thing so much, it made things so much more tense in that way, and I think they did a really great job with that overall. I loved all of the 360 angles, and of course the cinematography with the Elliot stuff. I loved how dreamlike and bleak it really all was. I think they did a really excellent job with that too. But then stuff like the score was always incredible. Matt Quayle was just always knocking it out of the park, and the editing in this episode was top-notch as well. And I like that Elliot was not the main focus here. This episode really was centered more on Darlene and Dom. We still had Elliot, but it makes sense to put the focus on them, because at this point, Elliot is in a place where he does not feel as significant anymore. It doesn't really feel like he is as much of a part of this as he once was. And I think, a lot of people have been complaining, oh, where's Elliot's narration? I think it was a wise choice to not bring it back yet. And do I think we're going to get Mr. Robot narration next week? Maybe we will. Maybe we'll go back to that. But I'm just glad that we had this reconciliation between the two. We have a deeper understanding of what Mr. Robot's purpose in this show now is, but we also now see why this Deus hack is so important. It's not because Elliot needs to avenge his father, it's because Darlene needs to avenge those that have been affected by the Dark Army, because regardless of the fact of what Elliot's father did, the Dark Army are still terrible people, and this is a terrible organization that needs to be brought down as soon as possible. And as much as they're trying to humanize White Rose, I think they're doing that just because she's going to do something unforgivable in the next episode. I think that's what's going to happen. I think they're getting it to a point where we care for her so much that, you know, we can understand where she's coming from, only for her to do something completely unforgivable. And I think that's where they're going next week. I can't imagine what it's going to be. She says something in the promo about Angela, so I don't know what that's all about. But either way, I guess we'll just really have to see where things do go next week. But in terms of this episode, at least, I think this was just absolutely another near-perfect episode between the way it handled Elliot grappling with this revelation, and then the way it contrasted with the tension with Dom and Darlene and them in this very tense situation and how they're now getting out of it, but also how Dom and Darlene's stories aren't over, kind of giving us a bigger purpose for the Deus hack now, but also just bringing Elliot and Mr. Robot back together and why those two really do need each other, and also how close this has brought Elliot and Krista back together. This was just ultimately another really fantastic episode of Mr. Robot. So I'm definitely going to give this episode, Season 4, Episode 8, Timeout overall in A. So over guys, remember this episode of Mr. Robot. Let me know what you guys saw this episode overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.